So, hi everyone, and welcome to this session on turning rules and legislation into interactive digital experiences. Now, did anybody notice that this presentation, this talk, just suddenly appeared in the schedule? Yep. Few people? Yeah, so this morning it was to be announced, and then we managed to get this slot without much notice. So we've got a few little unusual ring-ins, but I will talk all about that in a moment. I'm not talking about you. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name's Phillipa Martin. I'm the Rules as Code practice lead at Salsa Digital. I've been working as a business analyst in the Rules as Code space since January 2022. And in a weird way, that makes me both a newbie and a pro, because it's a space where there's not a lot of dedicated people working in that Rules as Code space around the world. My background before Rules as Code was in content, and I've got over 25 years experience doing mostly online content and user journey work. Now, originally when we submitted this talk for DrupalSouth, it was going to be Michael Pronin, who is the Program Director for GovCMS's Digital Experience program. But obviously with the little short notice, I did very, very kindly have a volunteer / forced to be up here in Al.
Thanks. Thanks, Phillipa. So hey everyone, if you don't know me, my name's Allistair O'Neill. I'm around the GovCMS space, so I've been there for quite a while. The actual title's an assistant director for GovCMS, but it's otherwise the technical product owner role. And of course, with that, we work in the Department of Finance. I've been there for, just over 8 years. Have been on the customer side, obviously work on the program side these days. And of course, prior to that, I was at IP Australia and did a bunch of fun things there as well. Don't talk to me about trademarks, please. We've done enough over that over time. Talk to me about web things. And of course, that's my blank expression up there as well, noting that we're a bit short on time to get this together today.
I should have at least tried to get a silhouette, shouldn't I? Okay, so the agenda today, we've got a short introduction to Rules as Code. Then we're going to look at why Rules as Code for Australian Government, which is where I'm going to pass over to Al. Given he has been thrown in the deep end, I'm only going to ask him to do that section, and then I'll take back over to look at use cases, to show you the proof of concept demos for the GovCMS sandpits, and then next steps and questions. You can feel free to move about or come back, whatever you want, Al. Okay, introduction to Rules as Code. Right, so at its most basic level, Rules as Code is about turning legislation or policies or rules into machine-readable code. From there, we get a Rules as Code API from a rules engine, and that can be then used by different user experiences. So it might be websites, etc. In terms of our technical stack that we're using, so the rules engine that we're using in the process, we start off with legislation. So on the diagram that you're seeing on screen, if you start on your bottom right, you'll see the legislation. We code that into OpenFisca, which is an open source rules engine that was developed by the French government in 2011 to codify the Social Security Act over there. And then we're using GovCMS and Drupal. We built a web form OpenFisca module so that they can talk to each other, basically. And from there, as you can see, you can go to different user experiences. It might be websites, mobile apps, voice devices, etc. At the moment, we're focusing on websites. Okay, so the other thing about Rules as Code is you can have this one central rules engine, and that can go to multiple interfaces and also multiple systems. So one rules engine, many interfaces. As an example, you could have one rules engine, and the rules could be being read by a government front-end website and also a corporate front-end website, or a federal government website and also a state government website or local government. So it enables this cross-jurisdictional whole-of-government approach. It can also be really handy if you're talking about having an internal system, so you can have the Australian public servants actually using the same rules engine as what's being used by the citizens. And that obviously really helps with that ability to be giving them the same information. Now I'm going to start to speed up so we get to the GovCMS stuff. Benefits of Rules as Code: reduces ambiguity, creates a nice, clear, consistent citizen experience. I'm going to show you actually an example of that through one of our sandpits shortly. More accessible, it's much easier for citizens to be able to interact and find out what information is relevant to them or what rules are relevant to them. It's also more transparent, so it helps government to be more transparent in terms of what the rules actually are. In terms of benefits for government, it's easier to manage. So there is a little bit of work, obviously, as you can imagine. Some of these legislations and acts could be hundreds of pages long, so obviously it's going to be quite time-consuming to analyse those and then turn them into code. But once you do that, then you have the ability to, particularly using OpenFisca, to make changes and updates and set new laws and new rules that will come into place on particular dates. It's also reusable. I mentioned that already. You can use multiple interfaces. And you can also use rules as code to inform policy. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, about policy modelling. Okay, it's also recognised globally. So OECD 2020, 2023 and 2024. The 2020 reference up there is a dedicated report, really good read for anyone who's interested. And then Rules as Code was also mentioned in those 2023 and 2024 publications of global trends in government innovation. Very quick snapshot of what's happening around the world. See there the nice GovCMS logo down the bottom right for Australia, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Also, I mentioned before that it is quite time-consuming and therefore costly to initially codify the rules. However, there has been a cost-benefit analysis done in 2023 by Tim D'Souza, published in the Mandarin, which you can see the printout there. So again, another resource you can look up after this presentation. And he actually found that for every $1 invested, you got $2.61 in benefit. Now, I think with Rules as Code, it's easy to come up and talk about what it is, but it's that really seeing is believing. So seeing it in action really helps you to understand what it actually is. So I've got two websites up here. I'm going to show you, not Policy Engine, but I'm going to show you benefitme.nz, which was actually the first project that we were involved in with Rules as Code trailblazers, including Pierre Andrews, who many people may be aware of in Australian government, of course. So I'm now going to exit this for a moment and just show you Benefit Me in action. And then I'll be handing over to Al. Okay, so basically with this website, it looks at different, the New Zealand Social Security Act, it looks at different benefits. So people come through and they can answer some questions about themselves. So in this case, I'm a New Zealand citizen. Let's just say I'm 35, it's totally the truth. I'm currently without work. I do not have an injury, I am single. If you put in that you had children here, it just uses conditional logic to show extra questions. Let's say that this person earns $100 a week. They're not currently on any benefits, they're not receiving family tax, and they're paying $100 a week in rent and in the postcode for New Zealand of 1010. We hit submit. And then they're given what they're told, so that they've got a clear information there about what information they've put into the system. And then it calculates their total eligibility of $361 per week after tax. And it breaks that down further into that they're getting $353 from JobSeeker and then the $8 from accommodation supplement. So basically, once you hit submit, that front end then goes to the rules engine, gives the inputs that the person has used the web form to put into the system, and then creates the outputs being, yes, you're eligible and this is how much you need to get. So going back to our presentation, Policy Engine is a really good one to look up for policy modelling, but as I said, I won't demonstrate that now. So I now want to hand over to Al to talk about why Rules as Code for GovCMS. I will hand over the clicker.
Don't worry, it's my first time reading the slides too. From our side in GovCMS, we, and if you are not familiar with us, we have a panel that we've got out there for Drupal service providers to do work to help our customers in the government-to-government space. And of course, what we did as part of that panel, we've done a refresh in more recent times, but we've also looked to expand, obviously, the scope of what's in that space. So when we talk about our first bullet point here of late 2022, we very much wanted to move into that DXP space. We had a lot of inquiries, we had a lot of interest from people to touch into these spaces and have something available within or on or near our platform. Whoops.
You can go to the next one.
Oh, that's the only bullet point. probably should.
Oh no, yours is the next one too. You're up next.
So, in any sense, just as a bit of a side note, sorry, we'll just kill some time up here. We do a whole lot of technical documentation on a Thursday within GovCMS. And a big talking point we have about is use of bullet points, full stops and things like that. And I've now learnt we've got one bullet point on the slide.
Yes, one
Sorry.
bullet point slide.
We're a bit pedantic in those meetings, if you can't tell. Nonetheless. So, of course, within that space, DXP and RAC, rules as code, is one of those things. And, of course, when we think about personalisation and the sort of material we can ask in here, well, we can get quite personal if we wanted to. So, steps in the GovCMS journey. Ooh, numbered list this time. Let's see how many we've got here.
No full stop there.
No.
I don't like full stop.
Yeah, exactly. See, this is the fun we have. Thursdays are always fun for us. So, of course, when we talk about steps in the GovCMS journey, COVID vaccination rules. Funnily enough, that's been a pretty hot topic over the last few years, so that was a pretty good starting point. Probably actually missing a couple else off the front here, but nonetheless. And of course, we've moved into a sandpit program as well. So within that space, we've been provisioning sandpits for customers within our space, or those working very close within our space, to actually try and build something that might work for them in a sort of rack setup. And of course, future point, going down that roadmap, we obviously want to get that to a productionization point. So we obviously want that to be available for people not only to test or validate or share to the boss or communicate that these things can be done, we also want that as a point where that can actually be a product and can be delivered and available online. So that's pretty much that at a high level. We've also done a couple of small ones internally where I was the internal customer to measure against things we'd already done previously. So quite a few other little things that we've done in that journey there as well. Okay, cool. So from that sandpit perspective, like I'd already sort of touched to, it's very much a POC for those government departments or teams within certain agencies. If you've worked in government, you know there's a lot of things going on underneath the hood. There's a mix of things. Sometimes teams aren't even talking to each other. That's a pretty good classic one there too. But of course for us, it's important for us to be able to actually have a space where people can play with this, figure out whether it's going to work for them, whether it doesn't. Maybe it's a bit of trial and error. And for a lot of them, it's maybe the first time trying to do something like this. And of course, in this space, for the most part, it's a salsa-driven aspect here, is taking them through that end-to-end process. So Michael, who Philip mentioned earlier, and his team does a lot of that initial engagement, but does a lot of work with Salsa, and then Salsa pushes them through this process, gets them an idea of, well, what's the problem statement? What are the issues? What are we actually going to try and model here? And then trying to get that to an end point of, hey, here is something either fully or in most instances partially, something that you can actually try and put your hands on. And of course, within that space, there's things like rules mapping. So of course, understanding what is that legislation, what is that process, what is that rule. That's a fun one, personal experience. And of course, that obvious coding part within OpenFisca, which of course is a fun thing for Salsa and the team to do. Lucked out on that one. And of course, that other component, which when Phillipa showed that example earlier, and the current approach is very much using a Drupal web form to actually do that initial build. So of course, a lot of that's still sitting within that Drupal environment, getting it configured, doing the sort of conditional logic, the pretty bits that go with that. And then of course, that obviously goes through OpenFisca on the other side. And of course, obviously some really important ones here, especially when we think about legislation and potential challenges for what legislation could be against. Obviously having test use cases in there. So being actually able to validate that the rules go in the right way, that they align to expected policy, or maybe what it says in the legislation, or in a lot of instances, business rules. Validate, test, maybe a bit more testing, something. Yeah. So very important things there. And of course, a big one which I'm super keen about, and I hope other people are who have sort of touched to this journey so far, is an upskilling in this space. I'm not familiar with the technology myself. I'm very curious about where it goes and what it can do. And of course, I get the impression those who have at least been in this space, looking to certain people in the crowd, that they also want some of that information too, so they can be informed about how those challenges and changes and all the sort of fun stuff around that can happen. And of course, at this point, we're nearly at a dozen POCs. We've got a few more underway. A couple of those that maybe aren't there are some of that initial testing we did too. So we've had a bit of fun in this space. Still trying to get through some of those through as well.
You're done.
Hey, congratulations to me. Watch as I sit down and everyone wants to ask me questions at the end.
Thanks for doing that, Al. Okay, so now on to use cases. So what is rules as code actually used for? Or when is it a good fit? Eligibility is a really important one. It probably, I'd say, about 80% of our cases that we've worked on have been eligibility based. So it could be something like, am I eligible for, well, actually I'm going to show you an example later on, which is, am I eligible for a divorce? Or it might be, am I eligible for a visa or a passport, or for a particular cadetship program, etc. Eligibility with calculations. So this comes back to the original Open Fisca use case of the French Social Security Act and codifying those social security benefits. So Open Fisca is really made for calculations. It's where it excels. Compliance as well. So there's a lot of examples, but even looking at, say, a local council level, you could have someone who's putting in a building permit, and they could be taken through a series of questions to find out if their building plans are going to be compliant or not with the local guidelines or with a regulatory body. Classification is another one. We've got one use case with this at the moment, which is one that we're working on at the moment, which is a really interesting one. But this can be used across things like security classifications, medical device classifications, and a whole heap of other classifications. You might notice that I've been a little bit vague sometimes when I've been talking about the use cases. Obviously, being government departments, for some we have got permission to use their names and their specific use cases, and I will be showing you some of those, but for some of them we aren't able to be as specific in terms of naming the agency or the really detailed use case. Generally, rules as code works best for black and white, yes, no kind of scenarios. Having said that, we have found a way around this where we kind of might have a page that says, yes, you're eligible. We'll have a page that says, no, you're not eligible. And then we also have a page which says, you may be eligible. So this is really helpful in those many situations when there's a bit of subjectivities required. So perhaps they meet 9 out of 10 criteria, but there's one criteria where it is actually going to need to be assessed by a human person rather than by a rules engine. Probably the best use case where we want to get to is to create digital policy twins. So if you think about the digital twin where you think about cities and digital twins of cities and you use those to model infrastructure or public transport, etc. In this case, we can be using a digital policy twin to model legislation. And most importantly, you can model changes. So for example, if we wanted to, if we had codified the age pension, we could model what would happen if we changed the age pension age from 66 to 65. How many more people would be eligible for the age pension? How much more money would the government need to pay out in age pension payments? What would the impact be on our ageing society? What would the impact be on the poverty line? And all these sorts of things could be modelled and discovered through having a digital twin. Okay, let's get on to the fun part. So looking at some of our GovCMS Rules as Code sandpit demos. So first of all, we did manage to use pretty much all of those test cases that I mentioned before. So eligibility, compliance, click, 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 classification, and also improving the user journey. And the examples that I'm going to show, they're examples that also have resulted in an improved user journey. And this is why the title of this presentation was talking about taking rules and legislations and turning them into interactive digital experiences. And of course, we have had one as well where we created a fairly complete policy twin. That's one that I can't talk about, so sorry. Okay, so let's have a look at, as Al mentioned, we're up to 11 proof of concepts. We've got another 2 underway at the moment and another couple coming through the pipeline too. Oops. Ooh, okay, really suddenly caught up then. Come on. Well, that looks pretty. Well, I think this means that it's now time for me to give the demo. What do you think? Let's get out of this and do the demo. We'll see what happens. Okay, so the first one I'm going to look at is from the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia. There may or may not be some people who worked on this proof of concept in this room over there, maybe. Thank you very much for letting us demo this. All right, so obviously there are some eligibility requirements when someone's applying for a divorce. So at the moment, a user would go to their website, which, yes, you can see on your screen here, and they would have a look through the information. You can see there's some before you start, there's are you eligible, so let's focus on that for the moment. And they'd need to read through this information to find out if they're eligible. And then there's also additional information about getting legal advice or other things you may need to consider, etc. So when this proof of concept came in for us, the finished product I'll show you now. So basically the person is presented with some questions, so let's go through and answer those. So let's say I was born in Australia. I am not currently legally married. I am currently legally married. This was actually not in the legislation, but it was added in just as one to help with the user experience, just to make sure that the person is actually still currently legally married. And the same with this one as well, just to make sure that their spouse hadn't already applied for a divorce. So we check this one. To my knowledge, there is no nullification or divorce application lodged. And then it's asked which of the following applies to you and your spouse. Let's say that they're separated but living under the same roof, and they've been separated for 13 months, and they will not resume their marriage or relationship, and they have been married for 2 years or more. But let's say they were not married in Australia, and they have a marriage certificate, but it's not in English. And then we hit submit. So this then, as mentioned before, goes to OpenFisca, puts those inputs into OpenFisca, checks all against the rules that have been coded in OpenFisca and gives the output. So here it says, congratulations, you're eligible to apply for a divorce in Australia, but it's also got the extra information that was in some of those other accordions that you saw before. So it's worked out that you need proof of marriage documentation, and you also need documentation because you're separated but living under the same roof. So it gives you all of that information. I'm going to show you another use case that we also have permission to demonstrate, which is great. And this is from the scheme. So it's, where's the full name? I always forget. It's a long name. Thank you. No. There's another scheme. What's it called? The full name of the scheme is. Okay, I'll tell you later. So yeah, this one we had to look at different rules that were required for people in terms of whether a particular building scheme applied to them or not. So at the moment, as you can see, there's a website. People have to sort of go through to try and find out, well, what is accreditation? There's different sub-menu items here about the appeals and what the process is and what the criteria is, etc. But it's actually relatively hard to find out, do I actually need to be accredited under this scheme? So it was a perfect use case for rules as code. So we now have our website. So does the scheme apply? So let's say the work is being carried out in Australia. We also do these quick exits. So if they said, well, the work's not actually happening in Australia, they'd get this scheme does not apply. So let's say it is happening in Australia. The building work is not for residential single dwelling. The project is for more than $4 million. The building work is not part of a joint venture. They are the head contractor. It is being directly funded by, actually let's go indirectly funded by Australian government. And the Australian government is paying $6 million to $10 million, and it does represent 50% or more. And we hit submit. Come on, wake up. Sorry, I'm not sure why this one is not going through. Am I just being impatient, am I? One of my curses. All right, so scheme does not apply. Based on the information you provided, the Australian Government Work Health and Safety Accreditation Scheme, told you, I'll tell you the full name of the scheme, does not apply. You do not need to get accredited under the scheme. We've also created this ability in these to show me the rules to help with that transparency, so people can, instead of trying to interact with complicated legislation, they can actually see more simple, plain English rule statements, and so it's really clearer to them as well what the rules actually are. Now I'm going to try and go back to my presentation. Interesting. Which is here. Let's have a go. Fingers crossed. Action. All right, so that gives you some ideas of what GovCMS has been doing in the rules as code space, and hopefully also a bit of an idea about what rules as code is and how it can be improved. How it can improve citizen experiences. You may have also entered the competition at our booth. Has anyone entered that competition? Yep, it's going to be drawn later on for a potentially new name for rules as code. So what are the next steps? So next steps in terms of what's next for rules as code and GovCMS. Productionisation on the GovCMS platform. As we said, this is a stage rollout. Started with the original COVID POC, then the rules as code sandpits, and now we're in the productionisation stage. Part of that productionisation is an OpenFisca SaaS product called Assemblik, and that allows OpenFisca developers to host and deploy code out of the box using Assemblik. And if you want to find out more information about that, that's at assemblik.com. And now we're on to questions. Any questions?
So do you guys have to engage on legal professionals to verify the rules?
So we work closely with subject matter experts. So obviously with the ones that are proof of concepts, it's not as important, but we've still been working very closely with our subject matter experts within each department. So generally, depending on the department, some departments want to get involved as a part of the upskilling. And so we'll work with them on the rule statements and then the eligibility logic. And sometimes we have departments that might not want to get quite as involved and just want to come in and sign off the rule statements, or not sign them off. They obviously have to review them and make the tweaks and changes. The other interesting thing that's happened while we've been doing this process is we've actually found a few problems in the legislation, and this is where if you create legislation and a policy twin at the same time, you can actually identify these problems sooner. And even when we've had subject matter experts in the room and we've been kind of said, well, this means that they're not eligible by the legislation, and it's kind of, yeah, it really points out some issues. But yeah, subject matter experts are very important. Any other questions? Yes.
So before rules as code, you have to code everything from scratch to make sure that the policies applied on the right calculations is used. And I had a similar case where I tested everything and it looked at my client came back and said this is wrong. And so I did my own calculations, provided it to them, and they did their calculations. They've got one value in their calculations that was nice to prove that code is working. So it seems it can still be a problem, but hopefully that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when you have to get the rules correct, so that's where the subject matter experts come in, and hopefully with the calculations as well, the subject matter experts will be able to help with that as well. But we also, it's test-driven development, so we use test cases, well, not me personally, I don't do the coding, but our OpenFisca developers use test cases when they're coding, and we always have the answers to those test cases, and that helps to make sure the actual calculations are correct as well. Any other questions? I'll make one comment before we finish up, and that is to say that a lot of people sort of say, is this the same as AI, or is this related to AI? And so I just wanted to mention that this is not AI, and people say, but you can just ask AI questions about legislation or if I'm eligible for something. But obviously there are problems, certainly at the moment, with hallucinations for AI. And so a lot of people talk about rules as code being the guardrails for AI, so that you've got the actual rules that the AI can interrogate in coded, rather than them having to go through the actual policy, the original policy, and trying to interpret that subjectively. They have the coded rules. Oh, one more question.
So is there a schedule for you doing that then as part of this project?
For the productionisation on GovCMS, do you mean? Well, no, it's more that it can be, it's really up to the government department who's responsible for each piece of legislation to decide that they want to codify it, and then that creates the guardrails for AI using the Open FISCA coded version.
So they would all be individually responsible for doing their own AI and then
Well, yeah, I mean, they could build... So there's lots of different ways that AI could be used within rules as code. So one of them could be interacting where you have a chatbot that interfaces with Open FISCA. Instead of it trying to read the legislation, it reads the Open FISCA rules. But yes, it's up to each department to decide they want to codify. And that's where a program like GovCMS helps, because it can really lead to that whole of government approach where you've actually got cross-jurisdiction hopefully working as well. And obviously, as some of you know, if you're in government, there can be one single piece of legislation, but there's actually 3 different departments that enforce different parts of that legislation. And that's where you do need this whole of government approach, so you're codifying the whole legislation. Okay, have we got time for one more question? One more question, I'm being told.
I was just going to add a comment actually to the AI question. I kind of wondered whether or not first government first technically if you want their AI policy, AI framework, but then each individual agency to know what is their responsibility, what are they aligned to before then, help inform the decision if they're thinking about this code or otherwise. So I think trying to form a position on there where they stand with AI probably be a good place to start.
Okay, I'd like to thank again Elle for stepping in on such short notice, and thanks everyone for coming.